Hey everyone, Anthony Fantano here, internet's busiest music nerd. Hope you're doing well. And it's time for an exclusive interview and conversation with Fire-Toolz, a.k.a. Angel Marcloid, who has a new record on the way via Warp Records, Lavender Networks. I have been covering Angel's music for a minute, been aware of her music for a while, but I figure with this new project on the way and your cat hanging out right next to you, it would be an exciting time to cross over and have a formal dialogue and dig into the music. How are you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. I got my latte and my cat. And I'm hanging out with you.
And you're hanging out with me. I have to ask, are you always this? I mean, I will say before we even talk about the music, I have been like a long time admirer of your fashion, you know, like the color coordination, the fits, the hair, everything is always on point, always colorful. But are you always this color coordinated with your room? I must know.
This is how it always is. In fact, when I got this house and moved in, I didn't even put the food in the pantry before I started decorating. Like I need this. So.
No,
yeah.
That's fair. I mean, sometimes when I'm doing the weekly track roundups over here, I'll be in like a purple hoodie or I'll have my pink glasses on. So I like to color coordinate with my room too. So this is like coming from a fellow room coordinator to room coordinator. So I very much appreciate it.
Yeah, it feels really good. I really love organized clutter. I don't like it any other way. If it's not cluttered but it's organized, it's boring and weird. And if it's the other way around, I can't function either. So this is exactly what I like.
Okay, would you say this transfers over to the music?
When I was saying it out loud, I was listening to myself like, oh God, there's no way he's not going to make that connection.
I mean, honestly, we need a bridge over to the music anyway. So let's just go into it. Sorry, go on. You were muted for a second for some reason.
Perfect bridge. Yeah.
Okay. All right, let's start talking about Lavender Networks a little bit because, and part of the reason that I think we're having this conversation is that, you and I are both hoping that, working with Warp Records is going to, and I know it already has, sort of like created some people kind of turning their heads like, oh, who's this, quote unquote new artist that, this label who's long been sort of like the vanguard of, your thinking person's electronic music is sort of working with over here. From your perspective, what has the, reception been and sort of the reception around, this announcement bit?
Well, I think that I've been immersed in my own smaller following for so long that that combined with the fact that I haven't we've only released two singles so far, and the announcement that I'm working with Warp was only made at the end of March. There hasn't really been a whole lot of stuff to witness so far. Reception has been dominantly positive, and that's usually how it's gone with this project for some reason. There's a few more haters in the comments now, which is kind of fun. But it's hard to say yet. But I have a feeling it's going to be great. And even if it doesn't do as well as everyone's hoping and all of that, I'm just happy and satisfied with like whatever. Just the fact that they even wanted to work with me and have released stuff so far is such an honor and so exciting. So even if I gain like maybe 10 more listeners, I'm pretty happy.
I mean, as somebody who's clearly influenced by and a fan of a lot of the classic records that have come out on Warp over the years, and a lot of the artists that have sort of like defined the IDM genre, as it were, which I feel like they have such a dominance over, like an influence over that catalog. Do you feel like in a way, sort of like decades down the road, generationally, like, you're kind of carrying the torch in a way, like, for, I guess like this current era of artists or producers who could sort of like be considered on the cutting edge of electronic music?
Yeah, I guess I kind of ended up there in some way by, I guess I could say by accident. It's not like I haven't been like working my ass off like toward that. Um, but I guess I don't mean to be carrying any torch.
Hmm.
But I suppose in some ways maybe I am. I mean, I'm just doing what I love doing. And I think that that just happens to line up with cutting edge electronic music because I've always just done what I wanted to do no matter what was going on.
Hmm.
I've liked lots of bands and types of music at times when it was just not as popular to like them. I'm rarely lined up with the current era of music as far as what I'm interested in. I'm just like all over the place and just do my own thing. So the fact that I happen to be working with Warp and making this progressive electronic music is it almost feels like kind of an accident or like a random synchronicity, a really pleasant one. Um, but yeah, I'm just doing what I love. I'm just making the sounds I want to hear. And if that takes me to where I am now with Warp, then oh my God, that's amazing.
Yeah, and I don't know this if this is something that you can like well kind of speak to in terms of the context of your music and the sort of influences that have persisted in it despite certain trends or sounds like kind of coming in and out of favor, like you said. I mean, you've been doing what you've been doing for a long time. Kind of digging in my closet and preparing for this interview because I knew that I had it. I found my tape copy of Interbeing over here, which was given to me. What label was this again? I'm trying to remember the name of this label. I know they gave me like a promo with like a bunch of them. What is it again?
If it's the very first edition, it's Bedlam tapes.
Yes,
However you
yes.
say that, is that how you say Bedlam?
Yeah, yeah, no, I think so. And they sent me a bunch of promo tapes back in the day, including yours.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I've re-released it a couple times independently since then. But yeah, you got the OG. That's cool.
And, you know, like anybody who's been following you sort of knows, like, you know, you kind of came up during this time during the Vaporwave tape scene. And even though with all of sort of like your avant-garde and metal influences kind of really setting you apart from anybody else who was active in that scene at the time, like those Vaporwave aesthetics like really were prominent in a lot of what you did and sort of made sense within kind of that context. And, you know, that scene, as you know, and we can get into, like, has changed and sort of like been whittled down in so many ways. And yet, though, people can still hear that influence in your music today. I mean, I guess like a question to kind of lead to from that is like, you know, what for you personally kind of keeps that sound interesting and engaging for you and worth revisiting in your newest works, even though, you know, sort of like the hype wave that was behind it maybe 10 years ago isn't quite what it was once was.
Well, something that was really that I really loved about Vaporwave when it started to become a thing is that it reconnected me with my childhood.
Hmm.
Um, I'm 42, and so I was born in 84. And so all the music that the classic style of Vaporwave was sampling was all stuff that I was hearing on the Weather Channel in the background of movies and TV shows and commercials and elevators and dentist offices. And so it quite literally reminded me of specific songs I remember from those days, like mostly like from just having the Weather Channel on all the time. I remember Telepath, probably my favorite classic style vaporwave artist. You know, when I first listened to that stuff, like I heard songs that I recognized, and everything just sort of came together. It was almost like I wasn't into vaporwave as much as I was reconnecting with old stuff that really made me feel something. And the popularity of vaporwave and the influence of all the other vaporwave artists and everything sort of just reconnected me with it. And so the way I've thought about my work as far as its vaporwave influence, I think of it more so that I'm influenced by the music that influences vaporwave.
Hmm.
And so as an artifact of that, just like by default, I love vaporwave, but like I listen to way more like 80s jazz fusion and like city pop and new age music from those eras than I do vaporwave, because that's really where all of that kind of stuff comes from. Even the visuals, it's just reminds me of old stuff I used to see, but then in a very modern context and with my own like twist on it and everything.
Yeah, I mean, maybe a further comment that can be made on that as somebody who's in the same age ballpark as you is that I feel like at the time vaporwave was becoming a thing, and there's clearly like exceptions to this. I mean, I think, a guy like Daniel Lopatin, obviously in the same age range too, who's credited in so many ways as like, kind of getting the ball rolling on it, is clearly a product of the same era and probably has similar memories as well. But I feel like a bulk of not just the artists, but the consumers of the genre when it was at its peak, were people who weren't necessarily working off of those reference points and those samples from a point of experience, and we're more like, oh, this is like a long distant thing that's like kind of interesting to play with because it just sounds different than anything else that's out there right now. And if you've actually been there to have sort of all of that music sort of like, absorbed into you by osmosis, like it definitely hits different and means something else.
It certainly does. I really appreciate the whole like kind of feeling of an aesthetic of nostalgia for a time or a place you've never been or never experienced, because I think that we all kind of like get that feeling from like caretaker stuff. We weren't around then, but we still get that old kind of creepy, dusty feeling from that stuff. And so I really appreciate when people really resonate with a vaporwave who might be like really young. I just think it's two different types of connection to the music, and they overlap. And I don't want to believe that one is more authentic or superior, but I do think it's definitely super cool that I was there in a sense. I mean, I might have been like really, really young, but when you're old enough to start like actually remembering some of your earliest memories at that age, it was just like, Winger was number one on the radio, and all the TV themes had saxophone solos in them and like all of that stuff. So like, yeah, it all sunk in and contaminated me. And I guess for a long time I sort of suppressed it because I was playing in like emo bands and power violence bands and screamo and punk and hardcore and all that stuff. So I would kind of sneak in little bits of the corny swirly 80s in the music. Like I'd bring a guitar pedal to practice, like a chorus pedal, and turn it on for some parts, and the band would just be like, no, 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 like that's not what we are. So it's been trying to come out, and then just doing Fire-Toolz and having this kind of anything goes like lack of rules and limitations for myself. What naturally seems to come out are these choice few genres, all rooted in my past. And yeah, the jazz fusion / vaporwave thing is definitely a huge chunk of it.
Well, let's start, I guess, like kind of digging into some of those perceived genre clashes, because the more of your albums that I hear, the more I almost become like just familiar with some of these sounds. Of course, still to this day, it's always surprising to hear like, these new age influence, like washes of sort of like synthesizers and, different sort of spacey patches and stuff like that. And then on top of that, you have like, these super harsh black metal or like cyber metal touches, that like, I still can't to this day name too many other artists who are doing it in quite the way that you are. So, like what initially sort of drove you to kind of feel like these are sounds, these are styles I need to start throwing together? And at this point, after having sort of like stuck to your guns for this long, is there almost like becoming a predictability to it? And how do you continue to sort of like chase after that novelty and present new ideas to yourself and challenges?
Well, there's definitely a predictability to it at this point because I just do it all the time, and I know what I sound like now. And it's to the point now where like I'll compose something and I'll listen to it and I'll be like, I would make that, wouldn't I? Um I I never decided to pull in a bunch of genres like consciously.
Hmm.
I just make what I like, and the things that I like come from different places, but I'm like equally as passionate about them and affected by them. And it's like I don't I don't want to box myself into anything like to a radical degree. Um, so it's novelty to many as a listener. To me, it's just like probably the most natural thing I could do because I've always loved like cold, noisy industrial music. Love like like jazz fusion and progressive rock and metal, and I love extreme metal. I absolutely love deathcore and slam and all kinds of noise, any kind of noise you can think of. And it's like, I'm not going to sit there and start writing a song and being like, well, I could go into this industrial noise section right after this smooth jazz guitar solo, but I shouldn't do that because that would be crazy. And that would be like, whatever. Like, I don't even have that thought. I just do it. And when I'm done, it ends up sounding like whatever you're hearing. And yeah, it's just the result of like not saying no to very many of the ideas I have.
And just like almost like creating off of a just a flow state, and not sort of like trying to predict it too much or pre-plan it.
Yeah, I'll definitely get ideas in the moment, and then I'll have to create them. Like I'll have the idea, oh, I should go into a part that sounds kind of like this here. And then I'll have to go like hunting for presets and then tweak them and like compose the part. But it's still a flow state. If I was just like soloing on guitar or whatever, the flow state would be like in real time, like no delay. No pun, but like no delay between the idea and the performance. It's happening all at the same time in a flow. But when I'm working on electronic productions, my flow state is like lots of clicking, lots of opening plugins, and I'll hit record and play something, but then for the next 3 hours, I'm messing with it in digitally. Um, and so that's a big part of my flow state is just like knobs and sliders.
And considering this is like a snapshot of your process and how exactly you're putting these tracks together, how do you kind of like continue that momentum and keep things exciting and get to the finish line with some of the material on this record, taking into account that you're bringing in collaborators on some of these tracks, some of whom come from very different worlds musically than you do. One of the tracks that have been, the teasers for this features Jennifer Holm, who I believe is like a Nashville songwriter, if I'm correct.
Mhm.
Did I get that correct? Okay. And
Yeah, roughly.
again, vastly different musical background from you. Like, how did that connection happen, and how do you sort of like pitch a track like this to somebody from that musical world and get them sort of as excited about it as you are?
Yeah, it's kind of magical how that came together. I just took a shot at asking her, but she's a session musician. She's recording vocals and harmonies for artists who hire her and such. And so, it kind of started off as like, oh, I make music. I like your vocals. Like, how much? How much for a song? What if I write you lyrics? Can you do it? So it kind of started that way, but it grew into something obviously like way more meaningful than just like a studio hire or something.
Mm.
But I found her because I was watching an Eddie Burback video. I believe it was the one where he was critiquing like late night TV or something like that. And at the end of the video, there was like a sad montage, and one of Jennifer's songs was playing over it. So I assume it was just she's like got a really good like sync deal or whatever. So her very few albums are, I guess you can, get licenses to use them in your videos and stuff like stock music, library music. So I had trouble kind of finding the identity of it because of that.
Hmm.
But I just like searched and searched and found out who that was. And then I went online and I listened to her full albums and I was just like so overtaken. And I just like had this silly idea to just be like, I think it would be crazy if she sung on one of my songs. So I reached out and she was like, yeah, that sounds great. Like, send me our ideas. And it just kind of went from there. And I did say like several times to her, like specifically, like, are you sure you want to do this? Because it's like, oh, you know, trans anarchist, like stoner, from Chicago, like, who says fucking shit on Twitter and all this, like reaching out to, someone whose main gigs are mostly at church.
Hmm.
Um, and well, I don't know about main gigs, but she sings in choirs and sings in church bands and stuff. And so yeah, crazy idea, very unlikely duo, but it's so beautiful and it works out so well. I'm so happy we did it. It's definitely weird. I didn't plan on my Warp debut being an album where I would feature a bunch of people. That was not the plan. It's just that Warp scooped me up as I was kind of in the process of working with those singers, and so it just kind of lined up. I think that the next album, they'll have a couple of guests for sure, but probably not as many.
Mm. You just happen to be at a point where you feel like you have the platform and catalog and sort of like the ability to sort of be reaching out more and get people kind of like enthusiastically into the idea at this point, I guess.
Well, I didn't think about that, but I think that's probably true. I mean, that's probably just how most artists would be, I guess. They get more recognition and more listeners, so I guess there's like more like clout or something. But I would hope that anybody who works with me wants to work with me because they like my music and like my vision and maybe like me as a person. So if you see me doing any collaborations out there in the future, like if it's like a big artist or whatever, I'm doing it because I love the music or I like the person or whatever, not for recognition. And even if it's like Trent Reznor or something, he's like one of my favorite. So it's gonna be because I love, what he does or what whoever does. So yeah, no clout chasing here. I don't do that shit.
Did you dig the 9 Inch Noise? You probably have like a Twitter take on this. I just haven't seen it.
I haven't posted it. So
Oh.
therapist's favorite artist is Nine Inch Nails as well.
Mm.
So if we get off topic, a lot of times it's about Trent. And he was like, you gotta hear it, you gotta hear it. So I open up a tab and I listened to Closer and I was just like, I don't know. I wish it was different. I wish it was more. I mean, all of Trent's remixes of Closer, I have like a really distinct personality. And I know he was kind of trying to like redo it in a way, not necessarily totally remix it, like give it some more like power, like refresh it a little. And I really respect that. I don't mind it changing. I don't mind there being different versions of Nine Inch Nails songs. I think it's great he's collaborating. But I don't know, it didn't excite me too much. But I didn't listen to all of them. I've only listened to a couple. So.
Yeah, listen, I've had a similar take, and Trent Reznor has stand page shooters for anybody who doesn't know, and a few of them took me to task over specifically not liking that remix, but like the most of the tracks on the record do feel way more over the top and way more sort of like vibrant and aggressive. I think maybe they just mostly wanted to play it straight on that track because we're going to be playing to a large sort of like Coachella audience, so let's like have this be one of the most recognizable songs.
Yeah, definitely. No, I understand that. Yeah, some of the other remixes of that song, like on the Further Down the Spiral album, it's almost unrecognizable what the originals are. So yeah, I appreciate that, and I really look forward to listening to the rest of it. I'm really excited.
Somebody who is also on the record that I think like off the bat, at least I sort of like perceived as being like, okay, this is a collaboration that makes sense. I could see these two people being like creatively on very much the same wavelength as Zola Jesus is on the record as well. Have you been a longtime fan of Zola's stuff? How did the connection there happen?
Well, I was a fan like a long time ago, and then I guess I sort of just fell out of touch with whatever she was doing for like quite a while. And then I think one day years ago, I think she started following me on Instagram. That might have been what started it. And I'm pretty sure it was me who reached out first, although it might have been her, but it was just to like say hi and, thanks for the support. I like your music type stuff. And we just did a tiny bit of chatting here and there over the course of, I don't know, a year or something. But I think that in that conversation at some point there was a passing comment. Again, I don't remember if she brought it up or whether I did, but it was something like, "Oh, you should be on one of my songs and we should work together sometime." Yeah, sure, that would be awesome. And then so when I was writing music for, this release, there was a section that I was actually singing in and I didn't really like how it sounded. And so I was like, oh, I should ask her. She would be really good for this part. And so I did, and she didn't hesitate at all. And took a little time to, I sent her lyrics and told her what parts to sing over, and then she kind of took it from there. I don't think she did more than one take beyond the like the demo, and yeah, it's perfect.
I wanted to also get into kind of going back to kind of these reference points that you were making in terms of some of your influences, especially on the vaporwave side, kind of like reminding you of real memories and real places and real experiences that you had much like younger in life. And kind of contrast that with, I feel like something I'm getting more of a sense of with each new release and each new cycle that you come out with is just how much of an element I think fantasy plays in the work that you do. As much as like a lot of these influences and sounds that you're kind of playing off of come from a real place. A lot of the worlds, especially visually on the cover art of your music, just feel like they're representative of these crazy digital fever dream sort of spaces that, are nowhere near kind of like reality. So, I mean, again, as much as like, there are kind of like material feelings and experiences behind some of these sounds, like, would you say like a lot of the energy and kind of repurposing them and recreating them goes into creating this world that like doesn't exist? Is there a big escapism element here?
Oh, I've been asked about the escapism element before, and
Mm.
I think my first thought, my first instinct is to say like I don't want to do escapism. I want to be present with my reality, not to such a high like toxic extent to where like all I'm thinking about is everything that's going on around me. But I want to be present. I want to have my feet on the ground. But then when you look at the artwork and maybe even the music too, and you're seeing these like, weird abstract, like you said, fever dreams. I think that's a really good word for it. I think it's like my reality and my own world sort of like put in a dream world and abstracted and made into something a lot more surreal. It's like when you dream, you dream of things that you have in real life, but they're like warped and weird and do weird things and unexpected things and things that you feel are normal in your dream, and then you wake up and think about it and you're just like, what the hell was that? Um, and so I think my artwork sort of reflects that. It's kind of like reality through like a crazy like filter and removed from context where these symbols exist kind of by themselves in the room or in the field or whatever, rather than showing like this intricate web of situations and circumstances and stuff that I probably discuss in the lyrics. And a lot of the covers and stuff are just like it's almost like my room. It's like they need to look like that in order to like feel correct, in order to feel like they represent me. Um, so I'm usually doing these scenes of objects so I can have all of this symbolism that a lot of times points to like real life things.
Hmm. Yeah, it feels like warped versions of, I mean, for example, with like the latest cover art, if you could snap your fingers and sort of be in that room, would you just do it?
Uh, so I fantasize about going to places with atmospheres and aesthetics that I think are really fascinating. And so the album cover world would be one of them. But I'm also a very scared person, and it looks really creepy and kind of scary in there. So it's like I wish I could visit it and hang out in there and explore, not only with an invisibility cloak, uh, but almost like an existence cloak, like I'm not really there, like maybe like remote viewing or something.
Okay.
Because I don't know if I'd really want to be in there. That would be scary. I would want to
Okay.
go.
Are there inside? I love that we're kind of diving into this. Are there pieces of album art or sort of like visuals that you've put out in the past that you perceive maybe more in comparison as being more of a safe space or more sort of like approachable, or is there all sort of like an unnerving, uncanny sort of like quality to all of it that puts you on edge?
I think that there are 1.5 albums where I'd love to spend time in the album cover. The first one is from my earliest work, Drip Mental, on my old label, House You Mountain, my debut on that label, because the artwork is a computer desk. And even though there's a blue screen of death, there's also a coffee, a bong, a window that looks out into the Windows XP desktop field thing. And that's very cozy. Like you're inside, like you're in your office. Everything is, you're safe in there behind your computer. And then my album before this one that's coming out, Breeze, it's a bit sinister, but it's probably the most friendly looking album cover I've had. A beautiful sky and green field, and then there's bunnies and there's a smiley face on the garage door. But it's still a little creepy though, still a little unnerving. So yeah.
I do think that is one of the nicer album covers that you've done. I Am Upset too has almost like an aquatic kind of quality to it as well.
We went with the blues and the teals and stuff in that one. It's very watery.
So, I mean, all of these, now that you've like really built up a body of these kinds of like visuals and, the musical components that go with them, would you say like now that you kind of look at all of it with more of a bird's eye view, do you feel like each of these records and each of these sort of like, covers are coming from a completely different world entirely, or are they all different snapshots like within the same universe and we're just like kind of zooming in on different locations and different spaces, but they're all sort of like a part of the same web? Like if you traveled far enough, you could go from one cover art, one area that you're kind of like visualizing to another if you sort of like traveled far enough on foot or by car or something.
I like that idea. I mean, I've always referred to it kind of loosely and without much thought as like the Fire-Toolz universe, for lack of a better term. But if I think about it, it's like, yeah, they're all connected. I could definitely say, there's a lot of different ways you could say it. You could say different galaxies in the same galaxy system. You could just say different cities in the same country, like whatever it might be. I do think that they're all connected. And, you see over time, there are worlds that are illustrated, like movies, and films, like I don't know, I'm just thinking of Star Wars randomly, where it's the same universe, but obviously decades have gone by. So everything just like in the production and looks different, and in the way everything looks is different. Everything's like updated. And so that's probably kind of in the same way what my albums are like. It's like where I am now, but in that same fever dream world or whatever it's called.
And at this point, now that you feel like your sound or the influences that typically go into it, and I know this is like probably just my outside perspective and probably the perspective of most people coming across your work for the first time and kind of like perceiving you to be, just like inherently an experimental artist because you sound so vastly different from what is, out there on the music scene generally. Would you say at this point, as you continue to create and release music, are you looking for and searching for ways to, especially on this new project here, like expand this world and add things to it that were not there before, find ways to change it? Or are you more looking to kind of like further define what you already know and sort of just like explore what sort of already exists, within those confines that have been kind of like defined over your catalog so far?
I think it's a bit of both, although I do think that when things change, when things evolve, when things get added, it feels like a very natural process that I'm not quite controlling in a way. I feel like with this project, I do a lot more curating and allowing of things to come out than I do controlling. That's just the way it feels. And so when new things come along, like new musical ideas or new visual ideas, it kind of just feels like they showed up and then I looked at it and I was like, okay, that feels right. And then I kind of let it in. Um, yeah, there's just a lot of things that I do that I think maybe other artists could explain better because they know, like they have a process, they have like an order of questions to ask themselves. They have like these steps that they go through and this planning and stuff, but I'm kind of just sitting here and then like my intuition or whatever it is like um you can keep this sounding like trance pop, but do a blast beat instead. And then I'll just kind of be like, yeah, okay. And then I'll do it. And sometimes that kind of stuff ends up being like this new thing that I keep doing in a number of songs that I'm putting out. But yeah, like most stuff, it isn't that pre-planned. It's almost like a last minute suggestion, and then I get to planning and like make it in real time. And yeah, over time, these things develop and become like things that recur, symbols and stuff, musical elements. And I just let them be there until it feels like it's time to let them go, if that time ever comes. So.
I wanted to ask just because this is something like I haven't really gotten a full sense of from just like, listening to your music itself and, hearing you kind of speak on it in the few capacities that I have. But like prior to Fire-Toolz and, your experience as a sound engineer too, what was kind of like your baseline musical education experience before that? Because obviously, outside of like the production chops that you show on each record, the ways in which you're able to incorporate, these, solos and melodies and guitar performances that are like, a virtuoso quality, in my opinion, or sort of have like, these clear jazz chops to them. Like, where exactly did you pick that up, or at what point in sort of like your musical diet, or sort of like, diving into music generally, did you sort of like really kind of get into that and kind of like pick up that talent for that?
So my early life was very music oriented. My parents loved music. They weren't really musicians. My mom's a pretty good singer. My dad has pretty good rhythm. I used to let my dad play my drums sometimes. But other than that, they were just music lovers, and so I was raised with it. And yeah, I think my first musical interest that I displayed was probably wanting to play drums. Because I would use like wooden spoons and pencils and pens and stuff like that to just play drums along to what my parents had on the radio. And I think like a lot of parents, when your child is like really young, but then they end up being able to do something that you're used to being something that like takes a really long time for somebody to develop.
Hmm.
The parents are usually like, oh shit, like what's going on here? We should pursue this, or we should, I don't know. Like they just saw that I was like kind of good for like a 4-year old, like on the drums or whatever. So I got toy kits for a little while, and I think a parent's friend also gave me an acoustic guitar, and I think that I had some toy keyboards as well when I was young. And so drums ended up being the main thing, but I was still like kind of educating myself musically elsewhere too, like melodically. And I think when I was like 11 or 12 or something, I got my first bass, and soon after that, a guitar, and kind of taught myself bass and guitar for a long time. I ended up taking lessons for a few years further into my teens, but not very much. I've taken a lot of drum lessons too. I started doing drum lessons pretty early just because I started showing promise in that area. And so, naturally my parents were like, oh, we got to get lessons. Um, so it all started with that. But then over time, well, not even over time. I've always been an experimentalist of sorts, even as a kid. Like I would plug things wrong on purpose, turn knobs in ways I shouldn't, overdrive the signal of a stereo system and get distortion out of it and be like, oh, cool. And then plug my guitar into it and be like, distortion pedal. And so, I got into guitar pedals like fairly early, and I was recording stuff in my basement with 4-track cassette recorders and mini disc recorders later on. And I just love to experiment. I mean, I would run drum machines through guitar pedals and try to make stuff that sounded like Nine Inch Nails. I would tune my guitar down extremely low and try to like mimic like the first couple Korn records, but like with a drum machine instead. And like, yeah, just getting weird with it. So I think that like musical like virtuosity or whatever and experimentalism was just kind of all happening at the same time, and they've always been together for me. So
moving beyond like some of the experiments with guitar pedals and stuff like that you're talking about, like at what point and this is like I think pretty pivotal given the trajectory that we've had given in our earliest years, with us being millennials, elder millennials, really, we still remember those days where like technology didn't really play that big of a part in our lives. And then obviously like there was this really fast, intense evolution of like computer and music production technology, and with it being as widely available to the public as it is now, like at what point did the computer itself and DAWs and interfaces and plugins like really start to like become a dominant force in your creative process, and sort of like what sparked, you going down that path with things?
yeah, so when I started to learn about what electronic music was, and one of I think my education on that kind of started with late night MTV, like their show Amp, where they would play a lot of electronica. And then probably the Hackers movies and
so many good Hackers movies, late 90s, early 2000s.
There are so many good Hackers movies. I'm speaking specifically about the one with like Angelina Jolie and all of that. There was 2 soundtracks, 1 and 2, and I got both of them from Sam Goody. And like, yeah, that should change my life. And so, like I said, I was trying to do it with like drum machines and guitar pedals. I think my dad ended up like trying to explain to me like about like like we had computers in the house and everything, and I was on the internet very early, but he was telling me about like computer music production, and I was kind of unfamiliar with that at the time, and I was a bit resistant to it. I think that one year for Christmas I got one of the earlier DAWs out there, Cakewalk Studio, super old version of it. And I was kind of intimidated by it and didn't really feel like learning it. But what I would do is I would use a basic wave editor that came with Windows. And I do not remember how I got the music on there. It might through a floppy, or I don't even know how I got the music on the computer, but I would put old Nine Inch Nails on my computer and make remixes by like zooming in onto the waveforms and trying to chop things at the right spot and applying, like reversing or slowing down certain parts. You couldn't really do much because it wasn't even supposed to be like a creative program. Um, and I made this really awesome remix of something I can never have in Ring Finger that I'll never get back because who knows where that computer went. But so I guess that kind of indirectly like answers your question. I got into computer music at a really young age, but where it really took off is when I switched to Mac and
Hmm.
came with GarageBand. And that was really when I actually took time to like put down the instruments and start opening synth plugins, and making like sequencing music and MIDI and stuff. And so that was probably around 2009 or something like that, 2008.
Hmm. After all those years of analog.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, my dad was a very like sound-oriented person into audio, and since he's older, the kind of audio I was brought up with and immersed in was, mostly analog. My dad didn't have a bias towards analog or anything. It was just I'm just old. So when making music on a computer somewhat cheaply, I mean, Macs have always been expensive, but GarageBand's free. So once I got past the hurdle of affording a laptop, it just became easier and cheaper to just like actually make really good music just by sitting behind a laptop.
Yeah, I think like I think GarageBand still stands as like a little underrated in terms of like its power and everything. I feel like a lot of people tend to like, there's still some bands that I like now that make new records on GarageBand that sound pretty good, and some aren't so convinced.
I will say that it's a bit underrated, but also if you've moved on from that to Pro Tools or Logic or Reason or whatever you're using, opening up an old GarageBand project is so frustrating because it is really different the way things are kind of set up. So it's almost like I get like frozen up, like I don't even know what to do in it anymore. But still, it's a very important software, and there are albums out there like Billboard albums that were made on GarageBand. I wish I could remember which ones they are, but I do specifically remember looking this up not too long ago.
Hmm. Yeah, and Billboard records that are built off of like random stems that people are buying off these stem websites right now, like which is like an increasingly popular thing. Is that something that you ever sort of like work in your creative process, or do you like to prefer to sort of just like generate all of your own sounds?
I generate many of my own sounds, but I also love samples. I love
Hmm.
sample packs.
Hmm.
I don't sample like melodies or chord progressions or anything. I might sample chords and then arrange them. Um, but I do really like collecting sample packs.
And
I
you've done your own sample packs too, just for anybody who needs to know.
Yeah, I just dropped 15 more of them on my website, angelicsamples.com.
Angelicsamples.com. Go there today for all for all of your Angel Marcloid sample needs.
Yeah. I think that samples are really fun. I love having toy boxes full of things and like reaching in and just plucking out some weird snare that was released by some EDM producer somewhere or something, and bringing that into the world I've built to integrate it. It's like finding something on the ground. That's shiny and cool. And I kind of feel like a lot of my collaborations with other artists are like that. Like when they contribute vocals, it's almost like there's this thing from elsewhere. I'm going to bring it in. It's an integral part of the story. So yeah, samples are used when they're small and they're kind of like brush strokes in the big picture. On older albums, I did do a bit more generous sampling. Like in my early stuff, you'll just find straight up clips right out of Dillinger Escape Plan, Billy Idol, Get Up Kids, Copeland, Celine Dion, Ghost Town DJs. I would just kind of yoink and like, paste it in, kind of like in the way that, hip hop operates a lot of times, but I would embellish it like way more. But I don't really do that anymore. And I don't know why. Is it a sense of like pride or something, like I don't use samples. I don't know. I don't think that because I love sample-based music, but I guess there's just something about maybe being even more involved with the creation of the sounds. It is exciting. But who knows? I missed sampling in a way. I might just do a Plunderphonics album at some point or something. We'll see.
Does it also have anything to do with like tweaking or the assembly of your music? I know there are some people who have like like anal retentive qualities when it comes to sort of like when you are producing or putting something together, having a destructive process versus something where each sound is sort of like isolated and I can sort of like manipulate, this one single snare like in whatever way I can at any point in the song, so I choose.
Basically, I keep things as much as granular and separated as possible, unless a destructive process is necessary to create the sound. Like, I'm done mixing a song and it's ready for mastering. There's still gonna be like 200 tracks intact in the project. But I will definitely be destructive and comp like 12 layers all down to one because I have some kind of processing on all of them at one time and they need to be together and I need to comp it down to one track in order to do something else with it. So it really goes in all different directions. It really just depends on like what the music needs. I will maintain as much like MIDI information as I can all the way through the process, even though people always tell you to commit and move on. I do not commit and move on. I tweak and tweak and tweak, and it's fun to tweak. And I usually don't make it worse when I tweak, and tweaking gets me to the end point. And yeah, if I get all the way to the end of the song and I decide that the main synth patch, like I don't like it, it's going to be a huge pain in the ass, but I'll change it and then I'll go back in and like fix the mix around it and blah, blah, blah. Like, I don't want to keep myself from doing that. I think that people that endlessly tweak and like dig themselves into holes, make their songs worse, and they never finish them and they never release them, then definitely the advice of, commit and move on is probably just essential. But I'm very thankful that I can just have, edit parties for hours and hours and hours and have a good time doing it and be satisfied when it's over.
Okay, wait, I think we should dig a little further on this because this is coming from the perspective of somebody who also offers their, talents as a mix engineer and somebody who does mastering as well.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, I imagine just like kind of on the instrument front, you are self-taught on that as well. But still, your talent shined through in your own work. And, I'm curious in your own perspective, like it is like very much a tale as old as time that as you kind of go back and continue changing things and tweaking things and turning things, it does kind of like progressively get worse. But, like in your experience and from your perspective, what are people often doing that's making it sound shittier that they shouldn't be going back and doing in the first place?
I think a lot of times when people over tweak, it's out of fear. They're like, this isn't good enough.
Okay, so you're creating and making with no fear, and they're cowards and they're fucking it up, and that's why.
There can definitely be fear depending on what I'm working on, especially if it's like a bigger artist or like, I don't know, it can be a little bit intimidating. But I do have to say that this praising of endless tweaking that I'm doing, it doesn't actually really apply to most mixing and mastering projects for other artists I do, unless I am doing a bunch of producing, and then I might kind of approach it as like one of my own songs or just, a collaboration with someone else. It's interesting. I think when I'm mixing or mastering someone else's material, the end point comes sooner. The feeling of this is complete comes a lot easier. I'm not really world building in the way that my clients are when they're putting together their records. In mixing, that's definitely part of it. You do contribute to that to any extent, depending on what the project needs, to the point where you're totally transforming it and finding the sound for the artist, all the way to barely doing anything because their production's already so good. But yeah, I don't go on and on and on for my clients. It's almost like I hear what you're going for. I'm gonna do what sounds best with that, and then I do it and I present it, and they either want some changes or they say it sounds good. But when it comes to Fire-Toolz, like let's say the deadline for my master is next week, I'm I'm gonna be fucking with these songs, you know, 24, well, not 24/7. I have to work and sleep and stuff, but just a lot until that deadline. Not out of anxiety, like I got to get this right, but because I just want to get everything, I don't know, just right. Sometimes zero point 0.3 decibels is like the perfect answer, to tie it up. So
Yeah, some things you just have to kind of call it on in terms of like letting it go because it's just going to be what it's going to be. And, if you kind of limit yourself forever, it's just not going to get done. And if nothing comes out, then you're essentially doing nothing and all the work is for nothing, even if it's like not perfect, as perfect as it could possibly be.
yeah,
Is
I
there,
think
oh,
really good advice for other people is to just release it and move on.
Is there, speaking kind of more to that process of kind of mastering for others and kind of like doing those final sort of like tweaks and alterations to make, the sound of an album really come together? Has there been, as you've continued to kind of like, grow in that space and offer your services on that front, has there been a project in a recent memory where like, because of who the artist was or sort of like how the project sounded, where the pressure was really on, like, oh, I can't screw this up, or this is like kind of a tough one, but you kind of ended up pulling through?
Yeah, and I always surprise myself because I will get really nervous about certain ones. But the thing is, when people are reaching out to me, usually if they're any kind of notable artist or have been around a while playing music for a while, most of the time when I get hired it's because they're already familiar with my work, either as Fire-Toolz or some other musical project, or just like my portfolio of albums I worked on over time, and so they kind of already know that they're probably gonna get a good result. So I don't really need to be as nervous as I can get. Yeah, because those people chose me for a reason, and um, so it usually turns out well. I think, I've done hundreds and hundreds of projects over the years, and I think that there's been, maybe probably like three or four that like didn't work out to some degree, somewhere during the process, as far as like, giving people what they want or what they're looking for. Sometimes it's because the expectations are screwed up, and other times it's because people are undecided, and it could be anything. But yeah, most of the time it goes pretty well because people know what they're getting into, and a lot of the people who hire me do so because they want to work with somebody who like maybe gets their weirder ideas, who's worked with other engineers in the past who maybe work on more conventional music and like don't even know how to approach their weird ideas.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, I think part of the beauty of what you do is even if, and I'm sure most people aren't like, even if somebody isn't like, inspired by you directly and like coming to you, handing you a project that sounds like something you would do, I guess like how do I put this? Like I'm at a loss for words. Okay. So I guess the beauty of coming to you as a mixing engineer is like listening to your work. It's so apparent that you are familiar with so many different music styles. So regardless of what somebody might be going for, it's like you have a ballpark idea of how something in a certain genre or certain lane should sound probably, So it's like it would be foolish for people who just do progressive electronic music to come to you, or just do metal music to come to you, or just do, rock music to come to you, or whatever. I imagine you probably get a range.
Yes, I do get a range. And when I first started this business, I was really encouraged by some of the people I was learning from to niche down. And, you don't want to be a Jack or a Jane or whatever the non-binary version is, of all trades. Because like, if you have a record that's a very specific genre and you're looking for someone to mix it, are you going to choose the person who knows how to do 100 different genres, or are you going to hire the person that works primarily on exactly what you're trying to do? It usually makes more sense to hire that expert. But my niche is like my own creative approach to genres rather than a genre. And I've had people hire me for their progressive jazz funk song because they've heard Fire-Toolz and like it and still somehow know that I'll be able to nail it. Same goes with, there are metal bands. Usually they're somewhat experimental, but it's still like drums, guitar, bass type music. And they come to me because they think that I understand, harsh, aggressive music that has like weirder elements to it, or like maybe, it's a black metal band, but they have like 3 keyboard players or something. Like they find me because they want to find someone who like won't think that that is stupid or crazy or not going to work.
You're not going to judge for the 3 keyboard players in the black metal band.
No, and I just made that up. They're better than a black metal band with 3 keyboard players because they would be my favorite band if I could find them.
There's got to be at least one out there.
There has to be at least one.
We're putting out an open call for the black metal band with 3 keyboard players.
Yeah, please comments. If there's 2, then don't bother. If it's a guitar player who plays keyboards sometimes, but they have 2 full-time keyboard players already that don't play other instruments, I'll accept that.
Okay, good to know. Yeah, and like I understand the reason that you would have specialists, especially in niche genres that most people aren't familiar with. And somebody who works with a lot of, of the bigger artists in that lane. And, I understand sort of like the need for certain types of production conformity to sort of like save time, and everybody who's releasing an album and is hoping to sort of like thrive and, succeed off of that music commercially is like probably thinking of what's the audience for this. It's like what other records or artists in this lane are doing well. But as somebody who's like, a critic and just a music fan generally, it's always like kind of disappointing when I hear some of these classic bands, like they go to that, seasoned vet engineer that everybody works with. And then lo and behold, after, their recording session or their mastering session or whatever, like that album just ends up sounding like the last 5 albums that person worked on. And it's sort of like, well, what's the point? Like there's already 4 albums out there like this. It's not interesting.
Yeah, I think that there are, like, depending on what you're going for, there are engineers to hire. And, when I do a record that's dominantly metal or dominantly indie rock or something like that, like, you might not be getting the expertise you could be getting in that kind of production. But what you will be getting is pretty close to that, and then make up for the rest with my own twist. It's not necessarily like it could be, lack of skill that I'm making up for, but really it's lack of maybe like commitment to that like very specific thing. Like if you are a metal band and I mix your record, I don't know, there's gonna be some Fire-Toolzy shit to it unless you tell me to change it. I might mess with a little flanger on your vocal reverb or something. So yeah, like if you want that conventional and very specific thing, like you were saying, like going to a seasoned engineer who specializes in that, then that's cool if that's what you're going for. And I think the people that work with me are people who want something just a little bit different, who I might get that genre, but I'm also not like some kind of genre purist who's not going to be willing to experiment or go out of bounds a little bit. Again,
the new record is on the way, and it's going to be out on Warp Records. Again, Lavender Networks is the title. And Angel, I appreciate you taking the time to talk with me about it and everything else.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me and for using your platform to talk about the little people once in a while. We really appreciate it.
I try to, as much as the algorithm likes to spank me for it.
Yeah, I know. No, it's so awesome. I love that you do that so much. It's great. So thanks.